Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Wade and Cody, Aubrey, Anahit, and who else? Anna, Megan, Chris, Brett, Tasia. Great to see everyone here. Reverb Mike, long time no see indeed. It's been a whole week since I've been streaming live. I think some of my replays for the Daily Creative Challenge are streaming this week as well. It's not actually me, it's just a replay this week. But I am live right now, I promise. So, great to see all of you, Abir and Eva. It's snowing. Ooh, where is it? Yeah. You're on vacation at Aubrey is on vacation at the beach. I am jealous. I want to go to a beach. I haven't been on a plane. I haven't been anywhere in I don't know. I just want to go somewhere. We've got Megan from Alberta. Go Oilers. You had to ruin it, didn't you? Go Leafs, go. Anyways, all right. So Masterclass number 42. We've been at this for a long time. 42 weeks so far. And some of you have been with me since the very beginning, so thank you to everyone who has been with me since Masterclass number 1. Also, anyone who's just joining, thanks for tuning in. We've got someone from South Africa. Great to see you. People from all over the world. Sao Paulo, Brazil, Ontario, Canada. That's a bit better. I'm just kidding. Just messing with you, Megan. Oilers are great. All right, so let's go ahead and hop over to my screen, and we are going to get going. So for Masterclass number 42, we're actually going to be starting a multi-week series. And if you follow me on Dribbble, or if you follow me on Twitter, or if you follow me on Instagram, I would definitely recommend you follow me on some of those places. Someone said, Conan is saying, I'm sleeping. I wish I was sleeping right now. I can go for a nap. It's frozen in Egypt. Yeah. Crazy, isn't it? The weather is nuts. All right, so if you've been following me on all of these platforms, or just one or two of them, you've probably noticed that I've been piecing together this cryptocurrency-based desktop application. And I've been putting it together focused on a specific coin. And it's an unofficial project, so I'm not being paid by this company. It's completely unofficial, but I want to go through the process of building this from scratch. And it's probably going to be a multi-part series. So this week, next week, the week after, possibly. We'll see how things go. Now, I do want to put a little bit of a disclaimer. Even though this project is completely unofficial, I'm not being paid by the company. It's likely not even going to be an actual product unless, they get in touch with me. But I do have some of this coin that I'm going to be for the product I'm going to be working on, but this is not investment advice. It's nothing. The reason I chose this particular one is because this cryptocurrency offers a product behind the scenes, right? There's a mobile app. A desktop app is apparently in the works. So unlike some of the other cryptocurrencies where it's mostly just like a network on the back end, there's a product here. So I see an opportunity to create a desktop experience and really focus on the user experience for this particular coin, right? So that's what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. Again, don't take any investment advice from me. Just don't. If you want to invest money, do some research and don't invest too much. All right, so we are going to get going. Let me hop over to Adobe XD, and we are going to, again, start from scratch. Now, because this is a desktop experience, I already have a mobile app, we are going to be starting with a web-based artboard. So 1920 by 1080, it's a pretty good starting point. Of course, if you really want to focus on 4K displays, you can start larger, but I'm going to go ahead and open up a new artboard and get going. Reverb Mike says, I have some Bitcoin, forgot my password. Isn't that the worst? I recently read about a guy, I think in Germany or something, that he had like $200 million in Bitcoin on an encrypted hard drive. ScreenFlow wants to access, okay, fine. And he doesn't know his password, and after 10 tries, it self-destructs. That would just drive me insane. Alrighty, so what I want to do now is I have my artboard, and let's go ahead and just name this desktop. And just so we have a little bit more of a real feel to this, I want to add a background. So I'm going to drag out a lovely rectangle across the entire document, and there it is there, just so you can see it. And if I hop over to Finder and into my backgrounds folder, I do have some fun, colorful backgrounds I can use. I don't want anything too distracting. I don't want to pull away from the actual application. So something like this image, it's a very simple gradient, right? You can also create something similar in Adobe XD, but I'm lazy. So I'm going to pop this directly into this square, and that'll get us going. So on top of this, what we want is the application frame. And simply, it's a rectangle, right? We're going to drag out a rectangle. And by the way, if anyone has questions throughout this stream, just throw them in the chat. I will be taking a look. And Cornell's saying, because of Bitcoin, GPUs are super expensive. I know. I did notice that. I think it was NVIDIA. They just added some restrictions on their latest GPUs so that you can't mine Ether that quickly, which is crazy. All right, so we have our desktop, we have our application frame looking pretty good. Now we're going to be putting a lot of things inside of this particular application frame, so I'm not too worried about the color or anything like that at the moment. We're also going to be adding some information down at the bottom. Eventually, possibly next week, we're going to have a menu that slides out from the left. But this in particular is more of, it's like the welcome experience or the onboarding experience. And we want to make sure that it's user-friendly. Because for this particular product, I would imagine there's going to be a lot of people diving into this who have no idea what cryptocurrency is. So we want to make sure that they understand what exactly is going on. Because this product in particular allows you to shop and get cash back and also crypto back. So there's going to be a lot of people jumping into this not knowing anything about the world of crypto. So we want to really focus on that user experience. So on the inside, we want to add some elements that kind of match what their website looks like. So I'm going to be pulling some inspiration from that. All right. Everyone's talking about losing passwords. Yeah, it would drive me insane. All right. What I want to do is I want to have a few slanted shapes at the top and at the bottom. So the first one is going to be, I'm going to drag out a rectangle right across here. And we're going to start by filling the shape with, we can start with a red. We're going to actually add a little bit of a gradient to this one, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Actually, we can probably add the gradient now, right? Start defining some colors. So inside of this color picker right here, I'm going to switch over to a good old linear gradient. And I'm going to switch this over from top to bottom to left to right. And the color on the left, we're going to go for a nice pinkish red. And the color on the right is going to be somewhere around the same color. We don't want to go too drastic, but we're going to drop that a little bit. So it's either a little bit more, red, a little bit more orange. Got to be careful with your gradients. You don't want to get too drastic with them. If you do something like this, for example, it's just now that's not too bad. But in some cases, the drastic gradients just not going to work. So we're going to stick with something like this, right? All right, so we have our gradient in place. Now what we want to do is we want a nice angle to this shape. So I'm going to double click to access the path and view. Whoops, don't need that one over there. I only need the one at the bottom right-hand corner and just drag this up. And in a moment, we're going to mask out these shapes so that they don't kind of overflow off of the application frame. Now we want another shape over to the right. Now we can very simply duplicate this, Command and Control D. We can flip it using this little guy over here and drag it over to the right. And I'm gonna have it overlap, but also I'm gonna have it a little bit smaller than this shape on the left. And for this one, I wanna change it over to a solid color. We're gonna go for a nice bright yellow. One thing that really attracted me about the website and the product that I'm doing this for unofficially again is that they have a lot of really nice bright colors. They've got a great style. So I'm definitely pulling from that. Now inside of this shape, we're going to have a little bit of a pattern. Now, of course, if you have patterns as images, SVGs, you can definitely pull those in. We are going to create our own pattern, very simply, right? So on the inside, there's essentially lines and little X's. So I'm going to go ahead and drag out a line like this. I'm going to round out the caps. I'm going to rotate this shape by 45 degrees inside of the Properties Inspector, duplicate it, Command and Control D, and then flip it. So we have this lovely little X, right? And if we zoom out, we can see tiny little X. Might be too small, so you can always grab it, make it a little bit larger, zoom out, looks good, right? All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna use the power of the repeat grid to go ahead and create a lovely pattern. So I'm going to select both of these lines. I can group them just to keep it nice and organized, call it X. And with one X looking pretty good, we're gonna press Command and Control R or the repeat grid button at the top right, and all together now, boop. There it is, oh, over my face. And with that done, we can go ahead and just drag out a bunch of X's going across and down. We can adjust the spacing. Let's try 4 pixels in between and 4 pixels as well, right? And view, and view. That's a lot of X's. Again, you can, you can drag in an image if you want. I think they might be too small. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. And now what we want to do is we want to use this shape in the background to mask out these X's, right? And what's cool about this repeat grid is if we wanted to change the style a little bit, we can always dive in here, select these 2 lines, right? Rotate them and watch what happens. What? Look at that. They all rotate. Fancy, right? I think we're going to probably leave it as is, but you can do that, which is wonderful. So we are going to find this shape here. We're going to duplicate it because we still want that yellow background. We're going to pop it on top of the X's in the repeat grid. Make sure that both of these layers are selected. So this path, which I should probably do a better job at naming my layers, but we'll talk about that later. Select both these layers, object, mask with shape. Bam, look at that. Now, these X's are definitely sticking out a little bit too much. So I'm gonna just dive in here. I'm gonna name this X's. I'm gonna dive in here, select either the individual lines, or I can select the whole repeat grid and just drop the opacity so it's nice and subtle. Look at that. Fancy, right? Looking good. Again, we will be masking out these larger shapes so that they don't overflow from this application frame, but we'll get to that in a moment. Now, down at the bottom, we want an additional shape. So I'm going to duplicate this, flip it upside down, maybe flip it over to this side, and look at that. Simple, right? I can always double click, grab these lines, drag them over. Maybe I'll make this one a little bit larger. Pull this up a little bit. Now for this one, we want more of a purplish color. So on the left-hand side, we're going to change this to, let's go for a nice, I guess that's the right-hand side. So this side will be a little bit darker, and then the left-hand side will be a little bit lighter. But again, not too drastic. So we've got a nice light purple transitioning to a nice darker purple, blue. Again, not too drastic. And then in the background on this side, we might want one more shape. And you know what? We could probably use this X shape again. So I can grab both of these. Let me actually name this yellow. Pop these both into a group. Call this yellow. This will be our purple. And we have our red, right? So I can duplicate this one over. Let's flip it and flip it. This one's going to be in the back like that. Again, just kind of peeking out like that. And then I'm going to change the color to, let's go for a nice orange. There we go. All right, so we have a bunch of our shapes complete and things are looking pretty good. But of course, like I mentioned, we might want to mask these shapes so that they're contained inside of this application. So with this shape selected, I'm going to call this container just to keep things organized. We're going to duplicate, very similar to how we masked out those X's. I'm going to duplicate this, move it on up, and then I'm going to select all of these different layers. So the yellow one, the purple one, I should name this one orange. So container, selecting all of those, object, mask with shape. And that is looking a little bit better. Now, of course, you can always dive in here, right? And make some changes if you want to. Pull this down a touch more, maybe move this over a touch. There we go. All right. It's getting there. Not there yet, but it's definitely getting there. Move this up a touch. Perfect. All right, so Nina is asking, just joined the party. What are we building today? So we're starting the process of building a cryptocurrency application for the desktop. Now, at this point, if I did decide that it should be taller or skinnier or wider, or whatever it might be, I can always just adjust. So I have this here, that the container is separate. Hey Marcia, great to see you. I can also select all of these at once, and responsive resize will do its thing. All right. So this is looking great. These will be called frame, and there we go. Now, one more thing I might want to do just to add a little bit of style is, so Cody's mentioning, so Cody originally said cryptocurrency website, I believe. Then she corrected, said app, not website. So this could absolutely also kind of form into a website, right? It could, a very similar style, very similar elements can be used for an online dashboard, for example. And maybe at some point in the future, I will touch on that. But because we're designing it 1920 by 1080 for the most part, you can definitely use the same assets. So I'm gonna just add a little bit of a gradient to this background here. Very subtle, like just like I mentioned before with the other gradients. So I'm gonna switch it over to linear gradient. And the bottom color we're gonna go for, that's the top color there. The bottom color we're gonna go for a nice pure white. And the top color, we're gonna introduce a little bit of blue. Just a hint of blue, right? Happy little blue. There we go. See, you can see at the top, blue, bottom, white. You wanna keep it fairly subtle, right? Let's go ahead and play around with this color just a little bit, because we're gonna be having elements on top of this, so we don't wanna go too drastic. All right, so things are looking pretty good. Now, we want to add a few additional elements. We might want a logo at the top right, left-hand corner, a way to close this application, and possibly settings. Because even though this is the onboarding experience, users still may want to close the window, and they still might want to access settings. So what I'm going to do is, let's start at the top left-hand corner for the logo. That's going to be pretty simple. And over in Finder, I do have an SVG of this particular logo. I'm going to pop this directly into XD. And there are two directions we can take this. I'm going to first make this nice and small and pop this to the top left corner and just change the color to white. Because it's an SVG, I can make it bigger and smaller. I can change colors. I can access all the layers, and everything looks great. Now, again, there are two directions we can take this. I can either leave it as this, right, the entire logo, or if I want to go really simplistic, I can dive in and just hide the additional text letters. That's the word I'm looking for, letters. And I can just use the X. Let me know in the chat what you prefer. Do you prefer the entire word like this, right? Or do you prefer just the X? So let me know in the chat. It's going to be about 15 seconds before you even see that. So in the meantime, I'm going to drag out some guides. So this is about 48. Let's bump this up 2 more. So that's about 48. Let me just get rid of some of these. Perfect. Okay. Looking good. Pop that right there. Now at the top right-hand corner, like I mentioned, we may want the ability to close this application. Ooh, X looks best, X, X, X. Okay, lots of X's. One for entire letters. Looks like we're probably gonna go for the X. All right, so up here, we want a close icon. Now, as you're noticing, we have a lot going on in this area, right? So it's not gonna be as simple as, we even have some X's art up there already. Little tricky, right? So it's not as simple as just like adding in an X, because it's gonna blend in. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by creating a rectangle. 24 pixels, looks like it could work. We shall see. You can always put a larger hotspot back there if you need to. I'm gonna round out the corners a little bit. Let's try 6. 8 might be too much. Yeah, 8's, I don't know, we'll see. Now, what I want to do, I want to make sure that we have some separation between this icon and the background. So I'm going to first start by selecting a nice purple. Now, speaking of these colors, as we're defining many of these, we want to make sure to add them to our assets. So if I hop over to my libraries panel, we've got our colors, character styles, components. I'm going to dive in here. I'm going to start selecting some of these layers, or what I can do to make my life a little bit easier, I can select the entire frame and then press that plus button, right? Boop. Oh, I missed the frame. Give me 1 second, let's try that again. What did I do? Okay, that doesn't work. I can select all of these icons or layers and boop, there we go, right? I can also start adding in individual layers if I want to, but I'm pretty happy with this, or individual colors rather than the gradients. I'm gonna go ahead and select one of these colors here. All right, we've got a question possibly. Why when I place, let's see, an image into a rectangular component, the component's green hollow indicator becomes having green filled rhombus inside the hollow. Oh, so that means, so there's actually, let me take a step back. Let me drag this over just so I can explain what's going on there. So when you create a component, you press the plus button over here to the right, boom, we've got a solid green diamond. That indicates that this is the main component, right? Now, if you duplicate one of these components over to the left, or the right, I should say, the hollow diamond is now indicating that this is an instance. And it also indicates that it's an instance that has not been overridden, right? Now, if I dive in here and make a change, either by dragging an image like you're asking or changing the color or whatever it might be, you're going to notice that we have a hollow green diamond with a dot in the middle, which I think is what you're asking about. That lets you know that this particular instance has been overridden. So you've done something to the instance to override some of the properties. It still remains linked back to this main component over here. So even though I change the color, I can dive into this main component, make changes to the rounded corners, right? And it's still going to push those changes over. So I think that's what you're mentioning, or you're asking about, but let me know in the chat if that's not. All right, so we've selected a nice purple, which I'm going to add over here to the right, the left. I don't know, the right, the left, over there, that way. I don't know. I'm getting my directions mixed up. So we've got this, but I still want to make sure that's separated a little bit more from the background. So I'm going to add a border. Let's go for a nice white border and thicken it up just a little bit. You can either add it on the inside, the outside, on the center, completely up to you. Just adds a little bit more separation out there. And now what we can do is, just like we did before with the other shapes in the background, is grab our line tool, drag one out, change the color to white, make it a little bit thicker, round out those caps. Let's go ahead and rotate this 45 degrees. Duplicate, flip, and we've got our X, right? Make it a little bit bigger. Perfect. All right. Let's go ahead and organize this, and this is going to be called close. Beautiful. All right. So we have our close icon at the top right-hand corner. You can probably still do a few additional things to even more separate it from that background, including change the color of the background if it's still too distracting, add a bit of a shadow possibly. So if you dive in here, add a very subtle shadow. You don't want to bring too much attention to a close icon, because then people will be, tempted to press on it, which you don't want as a developer, right? So you can do things like that. Subtle. But I'm going to go ahead for now and just turn off the shadow. All right. Now at the bottom left-hand corner, we may want a settings icon. I'm going to actually duplicate this just so I have something to work on. And for this one, because we're dealing with a fairly solid background behind it, I'm going to just change the color to white. Don't need a border. I can make this a little bit larger if I need to. There we go. Tiago is asking, have you ever made a masterclass on using XD for presentations? I think he deleted it, but I think he said, let's bury PowerPoint. So I have done a few masterclasses where I've created presentation slides and templates and things like that. I haven't done, have I done a full one? I think I might have. It's somewhere, but I definitely want to do more of those. So stay tuned for that. Now, this is going to be more of a settings icon. So very simply, I'm going to grab my line one more time. We're using a lot of lines today, which I don't typically do, but fun, right? All right, so we've got one line here, and then maybe at the top, we might want a small circle. Make sure that this is centered. And the border, we're going to use that same purple color. That looks pretty good, I think. I think we're gonna thicken it up just a little bit. Ooh, that's a little bit too, bump it up. That could work. And we're gonna select both of these, duplicate these over. And then for this one, we might just wanna pull this down a little bit and then grab this line back there, pull that up a touch, right? Maybe even pull this down. There we go. Make sure they're centered. And like I always stress during these, so Reverb Mike is asking, couldn't you just use the text X? So sometimes you can, but what you notice with, if I just type the word or the letter X, right, change the color to white, it's got these very harsh lines, which is not exactly what I'm going for. Now there are some typefaces like Sophia Pro Soft that have rounded edges, but it's still not exactly, like the angles are not exactly 45 degrees. So I just found it easier just to make some two lines, right? It depends. So like I always stress during these classes is, you know, when you're designing very zoomed in like I am right now, just hit the play button at the top, whoop, just so you can see how things are looking nicely zoomed out, right? Makes it a little bit larger like that. All right, that will do. Nothing too fancy. And of course, if you have a settings icon inside of, you know, an icon manager or even in the Icons for Design plugin, you can definitely use that. All right. Pop that there and make sure it's about 48. Yeah, this one I might have to break from the lines a little bit, because if I do 48 like the other one at the top, unless I just, you know, kind of mess with this a little, it's fine. I don't know. I'm losing my mind, people. I'll just pop this here for now. I'll worry about alignment a little bit later. All right. Ruben's saying, what is the reason that lines, where's the chat? Lines are on 5 pixels. Are you talking about these ones? No, these ones are 2 pixels. I'm not sure. Let me know what you're talking about. You might be talking about the 8 pixel grid possibly, but let me know in the chat and I will take a look. All right, so we've got some of our elements looking pretty good, but we need some additional options. We might need some buttons, for example, and this is a great opportunity to talk about components and states, some text, and of course the cards in the center so that we can start explaining to users what exactly this application is. So let's start simple with some buttons down here at the bottom. I'm going to grab the good old rectangle tool and drag one out. And I'm going to explain the reasoning why these buttons are here in just a moment. So let's go ahead and round out these corners quite a bit. Now they will be contained inside of this purple section. So we're going to make sure it's slightly thinner. And then we're going to type out, let's say, whoops, I can't see. Let's go ahead and sample a color. Create new wallet. Now we can start thinking a little bit about typefaces. So the typeface that I'm going to be using is the Museo. Museo? I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's Museo and also Museo Slab. Both of them are pretty fun. They have a little bit of a serif going on, which is different, right? Most of the time we're using sans serif these days, but I'm kind of liking how this one's looking. It has a bunch of different weights as well. Let's go ahead and pop that in the center. Make this 1 pixel larger. And I'm going to make sure to turn this into a component. So you can start by either grouping it if you want to, and just call this button, or you can just go straight to a component. So right over here to the right, I'm going to go ahead and press the plus button to create a component. And now I have my new button. If we take a look, it's looking pretty good, right? If I need to, I can dive in and maybe bump this up to 900 possibly, so it's nice and thick. It's looking pretty good. It's got a fun feel to it, right? Anahita is asking, do you do everything with keyboard shortcuts? Sometimes. I do a lot of things, like when I just resize that button, for example, right? I held down my command key or control on the Windows, and you can use your arrow keys to resize by 1 pixel, or you can throw in your shift key and resize by 10 pixels. Shortcut keys are pretty handy, and Matt Ray, if you follow him on Twitter, is working on a post all about keyboard shortcuts in Adobe XD. Umacorn's asking, is that why you asked us to choose a font on Twitter? So not for that. That's for something else coming up in a few weeks. All right, so we've got our first component here, and now we want to create an additional state for an outline version of this button. So I'm going to press the plus button one more time, create a new state. I'm going to call this outlined, and I'm going to dive in here. I'm going to turn off the fill, set a white outline. Let's thicken it up just a little bit, and this is going to be changed to white, and we're going to go for import wallet. Now, we have to start thinking about the hierarchy. What do we want users to focus on, and what do we want the primary action to be? Now, already we're starting to define that, right? Outline buttons are typically secondary. So we're also going to drop the weight to about 700, possibly even lower. I'm going to stick with 700 for now and see what that looks like. But if we take a look, we have our outline state, which is very clearly our primary call to action in this section, and then outline. So we can duplicate this over, switch over to outlined. Let's line it up about 24 pixels, possibly. Maybe 16. Maybe 16. We'll try that. And then we're going to make sure to center this in the middle of our container. Now, these are looking a little bit small, right? So what I can do is, because I have these as components, I can always dive in here and make these a little bit larger. Just like that. And I can dive into the state, the outline state, make this border a little bit thicker if I needed to. And everything looks pretty good. All right, so we have our two buttons, right? And again, at the moment, the primary button in this case is create new wallet, and secondary is import wallet. Of course, depending on what you think users are going to be doing, you might want the import icon or the import button to be primary. You might want the create wallet to be primary. Completely up to you and your team, right? I'm going to actually make this a little bit longer, just so it fills out a little bit more space down at the bottom. I'm going to group these, call this buttons. Actually, I'm going to call this wallet buttons. I'm also going to enable a stack within the properties inspector. And what this will allow me to do is, if I did decide to swap the position of these, I simply have to grab one of them and drag it over, right? And it swaps it really nicely. All right, so we've got that centered and looking pretty good. I still might think they're a little bit too small, but we might get to that. Cornell is asking, any sneak about the new XD update and its release? So not yet. So we did release a February update. It was a fairly smaller update, bug fixes, some improvements to responsive resize within 3D transforms, but we have some pretty big stuff coming behind the scenes, which at the moment I am not allowed to talk about. But we have a lot of cool stuff coming this year. Just making sure that some of these icons are big enough. Sometimes they look a little bit too small. I'm gonna push this over. All right, there we go. Perfect, okay. So things are coming along. Now we can start adding some content in the center of this application. And I want to start with a nice large header just to welcome the new users who are, opening this up for the first time. So I'm going to grab my text tool and just type out, well, hello there. We want to have this, we want to be nice and playful with this application. I'm going to position in the center. We are going to be using the Museo, again, I don't know how to pronounce it, slab typeface. We're going to make this one nice and thick. And let's go ahead and sample one of these red colors at the top. This one right here looks pretty good. And if I'm going to be using this over and over again, definitely go ahead and add this to your assets. You can also rename these if you want to. I'm not going to waste too much time. Right? And then below this, we might want a subheader. And let's go ahead and type out, let's get you rewarded. Now for this one, I want to make a few changes. It's going to be secondary. I don't want too much red in this area. Too much red is a little bit concerning, right? You want to stay away from that. So let's go for, since we have a little bit of blue in the background, let's go for something like this, right? Something along these lines, like a grayish blue looks kind of interesting. And then I really want to focus on the word rewarded. So I'm gonna, let's try 700, I don't know, 900 look pretty good. And then maybe for this one, Let's drop this down to 700 or 500 and possibly. Let's also see what Museo looks like. So Umacorn's saying Museo like museum, possibly. Oh, so Ruben says, what I meant with 5 is that when you draw a line in the transform panel, you always see on the X and Y, it's a half pixel. Let's take a look. It looks like it's not half pixels. I mean, on the X and Y it is. I'm not quite sure on the answer on that one. So I can definitely ask the team that, but I'm not quite sure. All right, so let me go ahead and make this a little bit darker. And I'm going to drop this in size just so it lines up a little bit with this text at the top. Now here's an interesting question, right? And something you have to decide as a designer. Do you want the text to this D to line up with the exclamation mark up here? Or do you want the period to line up? And I can tweak that a little bit, but I'm thinking kind of have that period float over a little bit. Visually, it looks a little bit off if it was not, right? Something like this. I don't know. Let me know in the chat, but I'm gonna go ahead and leave it at this and see what that looks like. Looking okay. Not loving it just yet. Let's drop this 300, possibly. I don't know. This is what we do as designers. We tweak these little tiny things all day, right? Drop the punctuation at the bottom. See, I was thinking about that, but you know, I kind of like it being a sentence. It's tricky. I mean, you could also grab this and maybe drop the opacity on it a little bit so it's not as in your face. I don't know. The period should line up with the exclamation mark. Yeah, possibly. I don't know. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. This is what we do, right? Yeah, I don't know. Usually we don't put the period there. Yeah, sometimes we don't. It's all about your style. It's all about what you're going for. Do you want it to be a sentence, right? I don't know. Let's try without it and see what that looks like. All right, so we're getting there. I'm gonna make sure this is centered. And I now have these specific character styles more or less defined, right? So inside of my assets, I'm gonna go ahead and select both of these and add them there so that if they are gonna be on multiple artboards, which they certainly will, then I can easily make those changes once and it's gonna change it all over the place. All right, now also on this particular screen, I might wanna add some fun shapes that are kind of floating in the background, and we may also need some pagination controls, right? Maybe some dots at the bottom, some arrows and that sort of thing. Let's start with some fun shapes. Drag out a shape like this. And this one is going to be a nice greenish color. Something around here. Ooh, that's a nice color. I like that color. All right, so I'm going to pop that there, and I may want to also bring back the pattern that we've been using. So I'm going to dive into our X's. I'm going to copy those, paste them outside. Now I don't need this many. There are a lot here, right? Well, I also don't need this particular mask, so I'm going to ungroup this for now. Boop. Drag this back because we don't need this many X's. And drag a few more down. And just like we did previously, now these ones we might want a little bit larger, to be honest. Let's make these a little bit larger. Space them out a little bit more. We'll do the 4 pixels again. That's 3 and then 4. And then we'll bring these back like that. And then just like we did before with the yellow and the orange, we're going to duplicate this shape, select both of them, object, mask with shape, and then maybe for these ones, we can dive in here and maybe just rotate the entire thing. Look at that. Just to give it a little bit extra style. Fancy. I don't know. It's mostly going to be covered up. I'm not sure how much I'm loving it. I can also dive in and... Another benefit of using repeat grids, thicken it up just a touch. Maybe. We shall see. Let's drop this to about 5. Whoops. Oh, 5. There we go. All right. Cornell's saying rotate the pattern by 45 degrees. Yeah, I think that's what I just did. Good minds think alike. All right, so we've got that, and maybe up at the top right-hand corner, we may want another circle, but this one's not going to be as in your face. So we're going to turn off the fill. Let's go for like a pinkish, just a nice little border up here. Just something like that, right? All right. We'll figure out where we're going to put these in just a moment. You make sure to group these. Green circle, and this will be pink circle. And you could also turn these into components as well. So Command and Control K for this one, Command and Control K for this one, because again, you might want to change the style across all of your artboards, and you can do that with components. Okay, so now on top of this, we may want to start defining our cards that we're going to be using to explain what this particular product is. So with the rectangle, one more time, let's go ahead and drag out a nice large rectangle like this. Again, we're going to be overlapping these shapes just so that they're not all up in our faces. Let's go for 24 pixels for this particular rectangle. And this one here, we might want to also pull in a little bit of a gradient, right? So let's go for linear gradient. The top color, top color is probably going to be pure white. We'll probably do the opposite of what we did on the background. Background, we did a little bit of blue at the top, pure white at the bottom. This time we're going to do pure white at the top and a little bit of blue at the, let's sample this, see what that looks like. That could potentially do. Potentially, right? And then we're going to add a little bit of a shadow, very subtle shadow. So we're going to bump it down a little bit. Let's try, I don't know, let's try 16 pixels and then really blur the heck out of the shadow quite a bit. 24. And then since we're using a little bit of blue here and there, we can add a touch of blue to the shadow, right? And then bump up the opacity, no, keep the opacity pretty low. Just add a little bit of blue there. So you have a shadow, but you also don't have a shadow. It's very subtle, right? No shadow, shadow, right? It just helps separate this light shape from this light background. And we're also going to be having a few additional cards underneath it to give this sort of like a 3D card look to it. So as we add those additional cards, there'll be even more separation. So if it looks a little bit too blendy right now, is blendy a word? I don't know. Don't worry, we'll fix that. All right, now the next thing we want to do before we start adding more content to our card is add some pagination. So very simply at the bottom, we're going to start adding some dots. Dot number 1, and maybe we can pull in this color here, which I didn't add to my assets. So I'm going to pull this color in right there. Again, just so if we have to update it, we can do that. And we might want, let's say 4 dots going across. So I'm going to, what did I do? Oh, I'm going to repeat grid, Command and Control R, drag out 4, 20 maybe, 16 might be too squishy. Actually, it's not too bad. I think the dots are a little bit too small. Let's make them a little bit smaller. I mean, too big. Words are hard. Okay, that could do. We're going to make sure to center this. And then we also want to indicate which is the active dot or screen or card or whatever it is you're using, right? So this is going to be dots inactive. And then over top of this, we want one more. Now, here's how you got to start thinking about how your interactions are going to look like, right? You could just go ahead and create another dot and just color a different color. But I want to get a little bit fancy with this and use one of the relatively new updates in XD, which is animated dashes and gaps. So I'm going to start by dragging out a line like this. I'm going to make this line nice and thick. I'm going to round out those caps. And I want to make sure that it covers our dots. So right about, let me make sure that everything aligns to our grid. There we go. Beautiful, and that looks pretty good, right? I'm gonna go ahead and change this border to our lovely red. Now, of course, I don't want this entire line showing, right? I only want a little dot. So what we're gonna do is, we're in the properties inspector. I'm gonna set the gap to about 1000 and the dash to 0, right? Now you're probably asking, what's the point of doing that? What are you doing? Well, let me show you a bit of a preview of what we're going to be doing, right? I'm going to duplicate this artboard over, and just for now, we'll pretend that there's a different card that's coming into view, and there's a lot of different things happening, right? I'm going to dive in here. I'm going to grab this line that we created, which right now is just a dot. I'm going to drag it over. I'm going to go ahead and increase the dash until it gets to either, the line down there, possibly, right? Or even a little bit shorter, completely up to you. And then bring this back in until it's basically a dot, right? A lovely little dot. Now it's getting cut off a little, there we go. It was a rendering glitch. Now, what that's going to allow is, let me very quickly wire this up. View, boop. Tap is fine. We're gonna choose auto animate. We're gonna do an ease in and out, and we'll do like 1 second for now. 1 second is probably way too long, but just to show you what's gonna happen, let me zoom in here and click. Whee! Look at that! Whee! Fancy. Ruben is saying, I miss shadow animation. Yeah, shadows is something that the team wants to get to. They're working on a lot of prototyping features for this year. I don't know if shadows is on the list or not. I don't know a lot of things at the moment, but I do know that they have said publicly that they want to be able to animate shadows. So it may happen this year, it may not, but there are a lot of prototyping features that are on the books for this year, right? Let me watch that again. Whee! Fancy, right? And of course, once you have another artboard, like we're going to do eventually, let me zoom in here. We can just do the exact same thing. We can grab this dot. If I can grab it. What did I do? Oh no, I keep pressing the wrong short. I got a new keyboard lately, or not too long ago, and I keep pressing the wrong keys. It's really annoying. So I'm gonna drag this out, right? Like that, move this on over, and then put the dash back to 0. And now we can continue this process. So from this one, you go here, right? One more time. Whoop. Whoop. Oh, that one didn't animate. Why did you not animate? What did I do wrong? Oh, you know what I think I have to do? Just pull this back this way. No, I don't know what I did wrong. I did something wrong. We'll figure that out when we actually get to the different artboards. But the first two worked, right? That's all that matters. All right. So our dot is looking good. And now in order to help users navigate to the various cards, we may want to add, 2 arrows. One to go to the next card, one to go back. Most UX unfriendly keyboard ever. I agree, Aubrey. It is not, there are literally no... Well, let me unplug this. Let me switch back to me for a second. There we go. There's me. Aside from the top, I have no keys on this keyboard. Look at that. No letters. That's what I have keys. There are no letters on the keyboard. So it's not the smartest thing in the world. But whoops, that's my name. That's not it. Wrong button. There we go. All right. So again, arrows, right? Arrows are simple. I'm going to show my grid, Command and Control semicolon. You can also do that by selecting your artboard and activating it over within the Properties Inspector. With the pen tool, shortcut key P, I can just use that grid to create a lovely arrow. Make it nice and large. We'll set the border to our red. Make this nice and thick. Round out the caps, round out the joint. And there we go. A little bit smaller. Make sure it lines up with the center of our card. We'll pop it somewhere right about here. We don't want it too close to this card over here, but we also don't want it too far. Then we can duplicate one over to the right, the left. There's me in the directions again. Flip it. Now this one, since on the initial state, it's not going to, there won't be any cards to go back, right? So we're going to drop the opacity quite a bit to about 10% so that it's kind of there, but it's also not really there. All right, why are you torturing yourself with that keyboard? You know what? I don't know, to be honest. I like the look of it, the very minimalistic look, but I do make errors from time to time, mostly because it's a different, my previous keyboard was more full size. This one is like 65%, so they're more squishy. I think that's where kind of, because most of the time I never looked at the keys anyway, right? I don't know, but I do torture myself. So I'm going to go ahead and also select all of these. So I'm going to, let's left and right. No, what? Left, right, left, right. Okay, yeah. And then I have my active dot. I'm going to make sure to select all of these, group them, and call this pagination. Bam. All right. Looking pretty good. So now that we have almost like the bare bones set up for this particular experience, we want to start adding some content on the inside of our first card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by grabbing my text tool. We're going to drag out, let's say, a auto height text box. And let's type out up to 87.5%, which is the key is somewhere here. I promise. There it is. Crypto cash back. Now, for this, because the card is centered on our particular application, it would just make sense to center the text as well. We're going to go for the nice red color. And 700, 900, Museo slab, Museo, I don't know. There's so many different options. So many different directions we can go. Maybe for this one, we're going to go 900. And then maybe for the text layer below it, we'll go for, this is more of a subheader, right? So, yep, that looks pretty good. We'll drop this to about 700. Drop the size a little bit as well. And then here, ooh, I can't spell. Let's go ahead and drop this a little bit. Now here's another decision you have to make, right? We're using this gray color that we used up here. Do we want to bring more emphasis to this? Do we want to drop this? And then if we do we want to drop this color, or we want to make this color darker across the entire application? So we could go in our assets and, make this a little bit darker, just a little bit, right? Maybe add a little bit more blue. That doesn't look too bad. Or we can do it just on that particular text layer. Now for down here, these dots, we could leave it as is, or we can override that and maybe just drop the opacity a little bit. There we go. All right, so we've got our subheader right here. And then the final thing we're going to do before we wrap up is add a few of these shops that we're talking about in this section. So I'm going to grab a good old ellipse, draw one out, and we're going to have a bunch of these shops going across. So Command and Control R or repeat grid at the top, drag a few out. Too little contrast. Yeah, I probably agree, Tiago. And this is where a plugin like Stark comes into play. You want to make sure that you have enough contrast, right? Drag these logos directly into these shapes. And there we go. So now at this point, we could leave it as is, right? Interesting. Or we can mask. And I think masking probably makes sense in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and this is going to be called card container. I'm going to duplicate this shape. Let's go ahead and move it on up so that we have everything else covered. These will be our shops. I'm going to make sure to select the container, the shops, the text layers, and also the container, and mask with shape. That way we can go ahead and maybe, give the impression that there are more shops coming into play. Maybe there'll be animation at some point. kind of going across, right? Spread these out a little bit more. Maybe drop the opacity so that's not too in your face, right? Something to that extent. And maybe, maybe at this point, this card might be too large. So I'm going to select the container here, bring this on up, and select the mask. Bring this on up as well. Take a look. All right, not bad. Now, one thing you might notice is that because I masked this container, the shadow is not there, right? So I'm going to actually duplicate this, or copy and paste it outside. That way we still have that shadow in place, right? There we go. All right, my friends, that is going to wrap it up for today. We're going to continue this process next week. We're going to build out whole darn application. It's going to be wonderful. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in today. Stick around. Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few minutes with his illustration masterclass. You're not going to want to miss that. And I will see you all next week. Thanks, everyone.